Greetings. This is Fight, Flee, or Laugh. My name is John Savers. I'm your host, and today we'll visit again with that seemingly constantly embattled gentleman, Mr. X, the curious courier. Now, Mr. X, you have implicated Freemasonry in the matter of immigration, in the matter of the deconstruction of the Republic of the United States of America, and in the establishment of global government. This is very hard to believe and to accept. After all, some of the most prominent or great men of this country, the founding fathers, were Freemasons, men like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and so forth. And so how can it be? There could not have been that kind of change, could there?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any preliminary comments?
At any rate, those who were educated, those who knew how to run a business and a country, were slaughtered. How Russia was to survive economically and politically after killing the educated and skilled of the country was apparently not considered by the ignorant, hate-crazed communists. As with the Grand Orient Jacobins of 1793, the Grand Orient Communists destroyed old Russia economically, politically, and genetically. These thugs made up Trotsky's Red Army and conducted the Red Terror. The best and most imaginative executioners were placed in the Cheka, forerunner of the KGB. The Masonic symbols left on victims slaughtered by the Cheka suggest that the Cheka consisted of homicidal OTO Masons. OTO refers to Ordo Templi Orientis, as I recall. For example, after the White Russians recaptured Kiev, the expeditionary forces entered that city in August 1919. The expedition's Rohrberg Commission of Inquiry found the execution hall of the Cheka in the following state and put this on the board. On the cement floor of the great garage, the execution hall of the departmental Cheka of Kiev was flooded with blood. This blood was no longer flowing. It formed a layer of several inches. It was a horrible mixture of blood, brains, of pieces of skull, of tufts of hair, and other human remains. All the walls, riddled by thousands of bullets, were bespattered with blood. Pieces of brains and scalps were sticking to them. A gutter 25 centimeters wide by 25 centimeters deep and about 10 meters long ran from the center of the garage toward a subterranean drain. This gutter along its whole length was full to the top with blood. Usually, as soon as the massacre had taken place, the bodies were conveyed out of the town in motor lorries and buried beneath the grave about which we have spoken. We found in a corner of the garden another grave which was older and contained about 80 bodies. Here we discovered on the bodies traces of cruelty and mutilations, the most varied and unimaginable. Scarlet and the Beast, page 509. Now, sir, the mutilations described by the Commission were definitive signs that the victims suffered from OTO Masonic ritual murders. For example, some bodies were disemboweled, while others had their tongues cut out. Mutilations descriptive of punishment given to Masons who revealed secrets and or talk. Some corpses had wedges driven into their hearts. Others had limbs chopped off and had literally been hacked to pieces. Others' eyes had been gouged out while yet alive, a practice typical of the Masonic ritual mutilations performed during the Jack the Ripper murders on the east side of London in 1888. The best evidence that the Cheka was nothing more than an OTO Masonic lodge performing satanic ritual murders were the numerous Masonic symbols carved into the flesh of victims' heads, faces, necks, and torsos. Now, this was published in the Scotsman on November 7, 1923, as well as the following accounts of the slaughtered 28 bishops, 1,219 priests, 6,000 professors and teachers, 9,000 doctors, 54,000 officers, 260,000 soldiers, 70,000 policemen, 12,950 property owners, 535,250 members of the intellectual and liberal professions, 193,290 workmen, 618,000 peasants. This is from Scholar in the Bees, page 509. Now, the Dedekind Commission of Inquiry reported 1.7 million victims slaughtered during 1918-1919. By the winter of 1920, another 1.5 million were butchered. A total of 3.2 million innocent Russians went to their graves in this benevolent Grand Orient working man's paradise. Their only crime was that they belonged to the middle or upper classes. In thousands of instances, fathers, husbands, brothers, and sons were compelled to watch these beasts as they raped their wives, mothers, young daughters, and sisters. The men were held at bay with sabers and guns and crippled or murdered if they dared to help their loved ones. Also, this same cruel criminal behavior was visited upon the German women on the eastern borders, and most spectacularly and infamously upon the women of Berlin near the end of World War II. Now, Russian Grand Orient Freemason Nikolai Ivanovich Bukharin, 1888 to 1938, head of the Petrograd Committee of the Russian Communist Party, and later killed by Stalin, gloated over the bloodbath of the Bolshevik Revolution, a revolution financed and sustained by Grand Orient Freemasonry. Duponsin quoted from a letter by Bukharin, reproduced by the French La Revue Universelle, March 1, 1928. Quote, and put this on the board. Here in our country, where we are absolute masters, we fear no one at all. The country worn out by wars, sickness, death, and famine, it is a dangerous but splendid means, no longer dares to make the slightest protest, finding itself under the perpetual menace of the Cheka and the army. Often we are ourselves surprised by its patience, which has become so well known. There is not, one can be certain, in the whole of Russia, a single household in which we have not killed in some manner or other the father, the mother, a brother, a daughter, a son, some near relative or friend. From Scholar of the Beast, page 511. Now, Africans might well ponder this matter of famine, which Freemasonry seems to like to employ as a tool of terror and massacre. Certainly the famines that have been occurring in sub-Saharan Africa may to some extent be weather related, but the disruptions that have occurred in the African nations have the reek of Masonic manipulation. Now, when Freemasonry creates its new people, a blend of races, it will liquidate the older stock, and the old people, this is a certainty.
Well, now, X, I'll tell you, I thought that Freemasons were a pretty righteous, stand-up group of men, some of the most prominent men in the country, in Europe and so forth, of Freemasons. They are always indignant at statements such as what you've just made. what is your view of what I've just said? Well, what's your point? Well, tell me this, Mr. X. Do they ever have any regrets?
Do Freemasons have regrets about their ghastly sins? Well, sometimes. In January 1924, on his deathbed, Lenin said, "I committed a great error. My nightmare is to have the feeling that I'm lost in an ocean of blood from the innumerable victims. It is too late to return. To save our country, Russia, we would have needed men like Francis of Assisi. With 10 men like him, we would have saved Russia." This is from Scarlet in the Beast, page 512. Now, Mr. Saban, I believe that this is a remarkable change of views. Firstly, because he makes reference to a Christian, and secondly, he seems to be trying to repent and be forgiven. It also sort of reminds me of the lyrics, "Start me with 10 who are stout-hearted men, I'll soon give you 10,000 more from onward Christian soldiers." But Lenin wasn't the only Freemason to repent. Many, many years before, Voltaire had expressed anguish for his deeds. By the time of his death, Voltaire had been a member of English Freemasonry for 50 years. 51 days before his death, he joined French Freemasonry. Yet the Masonic great architect of the universe was not there to comfort him. Plunging headlong into a Christless eternity, Voltaire shrieked his last words in the fury of despair and agony, "I am abandoned by God and man." This is also Dillon quotes Dr. Fouquin, who witnessed the awful spectacle of Voltaire's death. Let's put this on the board. With it, all who have been seduced by the writings of Voltaire have been witnesses of his death. It would be impossible to hold out from becoming a Christian in the face of such an awful spectacle. That's from Scar on the Beast, page 225. But unfortunately, Freemasons can typically perceive truth only at their deathbeds. Consider, for the minutes of the Italian Masonic Lodge, permanent instructions or practical code of rules, a guide for the heads of the highest grades of Freemasonry. And I quote, "Our final aim is that of Voltaire and of the French Revolution, the complete annihilation of Catholicism and ultimately of Christianity. Under the cloak of Freemasonry, we may conspire at our convenience, and arrive little by little at our ultimate aim." From Scar on the Beast, page 258. Now, an early example of secret society cynicism was the following. Author and 18th century English Freemason John Robeson, in Proofs of a Conspiracy, 1798, quotes a letter from Adam Weishaupt to his Illuminatus brother Cato, wherein he states his use of Masonry to another end. And put this on the board. "The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation. None is fitter than the 3 lower degrees of Freemasonry. The public is accustomed to it, expects little from it, and therefore takes little notice of it." Scar on the Beast, page 258. So, Brother Savers, I hope that I've answered your question about whether Freemasonry will hurt somebody. Also recall the Bible's passage that the blood of all the saints will be found to be at the hands of a single murderous thing. I think that there's probably no doubt whatsoever that Freemasonry is the body of the beast of Revelation, and from this beast there are several heads, just as there are several factions within Freemasonry, such as the English and the French Orient and Grand Orient and the Grand Lodges and so forth. but there may be others, but it'll all come to a head. And also the harlot mystery is Babylon is also carried within this this beast, Freemasonry. Well, sir, one of the premier tools of Freemasonry is deceit. There's an expression, the determined men of Freemasonry. They have a goal, the establishment of a global government, a universal republic. It will be controlled by the few men of the higher degrees through a supreme council, or in communist lingo, a supreme Soviet. Soviet being the Russian form of council. Incidentally, anyone initiated into the Communist Party in the 1930s underwent the same ceremony prescribed in the blue degrees, with a slight variation of replacing the Masonic apron with a communist red handkerchief. The authors of the Masonic Legacy tell how the initiation was conducted. I put this on the board. Admission into the party was as portentous, as ritualistic, as fraught with evocative resonance as initiation into Freemasonry. In children, particularly, the religious impulse was often deliberately activated, then systematically channeled into party interests. Amid various quasi-liturgical vows and pledges, the new pioneer was given as a sacred talisman a red handkerchief. This piece of cloth was declared to be his most precious possession. He was instructed to guard it, revere it, preserve it from the touch of anyone else's hand. That's from Scar of the Beast, page 514. You can imagine how disgusted they would be if somebody who wasn't a comrade, somebody profane, touched it. Now, although Stalin outlawed Freemasonry as an institution, he used the Masonic system in many ways, one of which was to infiltrate Western intelligence organizations. Stalin was aware of the importance of Freemasonry to Western society. Stalin knew that the British and American intelligence services were rife with Masons, that the chiefs of the secret services were wrapped up in Freemasonry. In 1936, Stalin set up training centers for the exploitation of Western Freemasonry. Mr. William Cooper, in his book, Behold, a Pale Horse, as I recall the title, made a corroborating statement to Ray Freemasonry and military intelligence. He said that all the naval intelligence officers he encountered when he was a enlisted man in Navy intelligence were Freemasons. And he says, theorizes that probably the reason he got there was into intelligence in the Navy is that as a young man he had briefly been a member of the Jacques du Molay Society, which is a sub-Masonic type of organization. At any rate, Joseph Stalin, then a 33rd degree Rosicrucian Freemason, became embroiled in a power struggle with Trotsky. Stalin won, continuing the bloodbath for the Masonic hierarchy. Stalin sent to the grave over 40 million Russians. However, because he was a Mason, information or news of the magnitude of his slaughter was hidden and suppressed for years.
Now, Mr. X, sum up parts 1 and parts 2 of this discussion on immigration, pro and con, briefly, and so that the viewer can understand, especially those who may not have seen parts 1 and part 2, can understand the general flow of your comments, your argument, and your ideas, and so forth.
Now, Mr. Savage, to recapitulate the two sides in regard to the immigration question, which we touched on in the earlier discussions in part 1 and part 2, the essence of the liberal view toward immigration can be found in President Truman's speeches. He dismissed as absurd and cruel the outdated notion that immigration should bear any resemblance to the ethnic composition of a country. Rather, he implied that it should be an instrument with which government would be able to realign the racial proportions of a nation to imitate a global configuration. Such a redistributive vision, diametrically different from Mr. Truman's earlier views expressed on the subject, required a far greater infusion of non-European immigrants into the United States than McCarran-Walter provided. Furthermore, the anti-restrictionists argued that the philosophy of McCarran-Walter, particularly the system of quotas, repudiated their interpretation of ideals inherent in the nation's democratic institutions. They felt the new Immigration Act was a re-entrenchment hostile to a movement towards emphatic reiteration of the moral principle described in the phrase equality of mankind, which was developing contemporaneously in Western nations. This is Richard Blender's International Migration Law, page 65. Now, those who opposed the Truman and the anti-restrictionists and the abolitionists, basically the free, open immigration crowd, Senator Walter F. George, Democrat of Georgia, is a fair example of the opposition, and he pointed to the rather subtle transformation of priorities that was the basis of the reformist argument. A new group of patriots has arisen in this great land. They now laid down a doctrine which, carried to its logical conclusion, and that is where they want to carry it, would mean the abolition of restrictions on immigration. There's a strange corollary to that doctrine, and that is that somehow people outside this nation have a right to say what immigration laws shall be. That's from the Congressional Record, Senate, Volume 98, Part 5, May 22, 1952, page 5773. Now, also, Senator Pat McCarran, Democrat of Nevada, who was one of the bill's sponsors, reminded his colleagues of a seemingly obvious fact, namely that a solution of the problems of Europe and Asia will not come as we transplant these problems en masse to the United States of America. That's from the Congressional Record, the Senate, Volume 98, Part 4, May 16, 1952, page 5330. Furthermore, there was a Senate Judiciary Committee report which stated, and put this on the board, the subcommittee believes that the adoption of the national origins formula was a rational and logical method of numerically restricting immigration in such a manner as to best preserve the sociological and cultural balance in the population of the United States. The subcommittee hold that the peoples who had made the greatest contribution to the development of this country, that is, Western Europeans, were fully justified in determining that the country was no longer a field for colonization, and henceforth further immigration would not only be restricted, but directed to admit immigrants considered to be more readily assimilable because of the similarity of their cultural backgrounds to those of the principal components of our population. That's from the U.S. Congress Senate Committee on the Judiciary, the Immigration and Naturalization Systems of the United States, 81st Congress, Second Session, 1950, Senate Report 1515, page 455. Now, although the press was very much in favor of the new immigration policy, the abolitionist policy, and the open trade, free immigration, no borders, and all that, there were exceptions taken to this new immigration policy. Professor Ernest Vanden Heg wrote, "The wish to preserve one's identity and the identity of one's nation requires no justification and no belief in superiority, any more than the wish to have one's own children. and to continue one's family through them need be justified or rationalized by belief that they are superior to the children of others. One identifies with one's family because it is one's family, not because they are better people than others. For no other reason one identifies with one's national group than with others, else there would be no nations. Ernest van den Haag, More Immigration, National Review, Volume 17, number 38, September 21, 1965, page 821. Now, all fears regarding a future distinguished by uncontrollable immigration from the Americas and the Caribbean because of endemically poor economic conditions and a birth rate that rises exponentially were dismissed by the new abolitionists. Senator Kennedy replied, administration leaders and those who supported them in Congress recognized this possibility, but did not believe such developments were imminent. Even the Freemason, Alan Simpson, Republican of Wyoming, chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Immigration and Refugee Policy, suggested that much, and we'll put it on the board. If immigration is continued at a high level, but a substantial portion of these new persons and their descendants do not assimilate into the society, they may well create in America some of the same social, political, and economic problems which exist in the countries from which they have chosen to depart. And if language and cultural separatism rise above a certain level, the unity and political stability of the nation will, in time, be seriously eroded.
Well, tell me, actually, if there has been some kind of important change, what is it? How did it come to be?
Freemason Sir Walter Besant, brother of socialist and theosophist, and I might add, free love advocate Annie Besant, began a drive in the early 1870s to organize a Masonic research lodge to catalog all the data which had been accumulated in regard to the roots of the Freemasonry. In 1886, the Quatuor Coronata Lodge of Masonic Research, number 2076, London, England, was found. Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry states that the Quatuor Coronata has long since become the supreme court of learning and authority in Masonic scholarship through the world. That's from Scar and the Beast, page 410. Now, the constitution of this Mother Research Lodge stipulated that 40 of the most prestigious Masons in England be members, one of whom must always be high up in the Anglican Church. When any member of the 40 died, the 39 remaining voted on his replacement. In 1887, a correspondence circle was attached to the lodge. Any Mason of literary, archaeological, or investigative talent could join the circle. Within a decade, the circle had printed the Ars Quatuor Coronatorum, a Masonic encyclopedia coordinating all the secrets of mystery religions in no less than 50 volumes, surpassing in size the Encyclopedia Britannica. The members of 40, whose duty was to study these volumes continually, discovered three important facts that would determine the future course of English Freemasonry. One, let's put this on the board now. One, that ancient pagan religions worshipped Lucifer in various forms. Two, that the Babylonian priesthood used drugs and sex as a means of people control. Three, that the same Babylonian priesthood instituted human sacrifice as a means of population control. Now, I'll just say parenthetically right here, you don't have to be Einstein here or Sir Isaac Newton to understand that this has pretty much been accomplished. We even had songs singing drugs and sex and rock and roll. Now, of course, we've had maybe 40, 50 million prenatal babies killed in this country. And it seems to me pretty logical that once it's established you can kill prenatal babies, it won't be long before postnatal babies have to go too. At least when the parents want to. And of course, it looks pretty grim for the older folks. Right now, they're maybe getting some choice in the matter of whether or not they live or die, but that may not come in the future. But anyway, continuing on, the Quatuor Carnata Lodge thereafter offered assistance to any Mason or group of Masons willing to apply these discoveries to present-day Masonic work, and obviously I would say there were many. By 1889, the hierarchy of English Freemasonry needed only a slight push to plunge headlong into Luciferianism. The World Congress of Freemasonry gave the British Brotherhood the required nudge. On July 14, 1889, the 23 33rd degree Supreme Councils were hosted by the French Grand Lodge at Paris. Now, I will say, of course, no publicity, just like with the Bilderbergers and so forth, they promised not to say anything, and all these organizations, like the Trilaterals and whatnot, they like the people to keep quiet, This is so even when people who are asked to join are heads of networks and big newspapers and so forth. Now, the purpose of this gathering was not to unite the councils politically, but spiritually, under the banner of the Luciferian doctrine. When Albert Pike's letter of exhortation was read, the hierarchy of the English Grand Lodge accepted the Luciferian doctrine, yet remained loyal to the monarchy. The French and American Grand Lodge hierarchies followed, but without giving up their Republican ideals. Now, of course, the Republican ideals ultimately is on a global basis, so that just as the communists believed that socialism was an interim step and capitalism was an interim step before that, so Freemasonry and the American and French group apparently believe that national republics are just a stage to, say, regional republics, and from there, global republic. Now, they already have the English Union in existence. How strong, I can't say, but basically a Republican organization. And now they're working to get a Pan-American Union to group the United States of America in with Central and Latin American countries, maybe Canada, of course, and have this Pan-American Union Republic. As I say, it appears that the Republic that the Constitution ordained is pretty much dead, with only Courier X standing up for it and a few others. But I will say parenthetically, I'm glad to say that as a native son, I did stand up and I did say a few words for it. And I'm glad to say that as a Christian, I have come out and stated my opposition to these Luciferians and to all those who are unrighteous.
Stick to the point, please.
Going on, although a few Grand Orient Masons, such as Giuseppe Mazzini, had accepted Luciferianism years before this convention, the general body of the Grand Orient Lodges, which were formerly atheistic, boycotted the French Grand Lodge Convention. Thereafter, the Grand Orients were disallowed admittance to the annual meetings of the Supreme Council of Grand Lodges. So we have a little cleavage there, and there have been really factions in Freemasonry for some time, almost from the outset, basically due to the predecessor organizations also having divergent views or conflicting competitive views. But at any rate, two of the most prominent Grand Orient Masons who did convert to the Luciferian doctrine were women. Britisher Annie Besant, who was living from 1847 to 1933, and Russian Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who lived 1831 to 1891. Both were members of English and French obediences. Both were destined to be the founders of our modern New Age movement. Now, on August 30, 1913, the Universal Masonic League was founded at Bern, Switzerland, where both warring bodies of Freemasonry could meet on neutral ground. Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry states that the object of this league was to, and put this on the board, to further the intimacy of relations between members of all regular lodges, Grand Lodges, and Grand Orients of all rights and countries of the world. Scarlet the Beast, page 413. Now, the Universal Masonic League was only the beginning of international Masonic cooperation. The Grand Orient's superficial alienation from annual Grand Lodge Supreme Council meetings compelled English Freemasonry to form sub-lodges, wherein both adversarial Freemasonries could meet on common ground without having to travel to Switzerland. The Quatuor Coronata Research Lodge was assigned the task of creating these lodges. By 1924, the Masonic Luciferians and Spiritists had already organized many popular movements in England as fronts, which could not be connected to Freemasonry without years of research. However, disillusioned members of these sub-lodges appeared eventually to warn the world at large. Now, Mr. Savers, one such was a Miss Stoddard, who was one of the ruling chiefs of the Mother Temple of the Stella Matutina. She informs her readers that the Stella Matutina was a byproduct of the research initiated by the Quatuor Coronata Lodge. As the members of 40 in the Mother Research Lodge received enough occult information to organize debased sub-Masonic lodges, they assisted Masons of degenerate character who would carry out the work. Stella Matutina was founded by two Englishmen near the beginning of the 20th century, each respectively members of the formerly opposed lodges, the Grand Orient and English Grand Lodge. The Grand Orient Mason was the infamous Aleister Crowley, 1875-1947, who had been initiated into the 33rd degree in Mexico. The other co-founder was 33rd degree English Grand Lodge Mason Dr. William Wynne Westcott, who lived from 1845 to 1925, London coroner. Now, Mr. Savers, these sub-lodges became known as co-masonry, since women were permitted to join. Soon, via the sub-lodges, witchcraft and drug abuse spread everywhere, even into the highest circles of society. Satanic jewelry became commonplace. Rituals incorporating mind-altering drugs, orgies, and blood sacrifice were discreetly carried out in the heart of the London slums and on remote ancestral estates. Freemasonic Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, put out a publication, Duties of the Brethren, which provided guidelines for members, especially when visiting retreats which OTO sponsored across America. In part it states, and put this on the board, every brother shall seek constantly to give pleasure to all brethren with whom he is acquainted, whether by entertainment or conversation or in any other manner that may suggest itself. It will frequently and naturally arise that love itself springs up between members of the order, for they have so many, so sacred interests in common. Such love is peculiarly holy and is to be encouraged. Now, this is from Scarlet and the Beast, page 432. I believe that particular duties of the brethren is redolent of sexual promiscuity of all types. Given the licentious nature of this order, at any rate, it is likely that homosexual activities were practiced and sanctioned. Crowley himself occasionally engaged in homosexual behavior. It is likely that political homosexuality is a sub-lodge of some sort. Its success with its 1 in 10 scam has allowed the degenerate Billy Jeff Clinton to put 1 in 10 political appointees homosexual. This is a sign of Freemasonic wickedness, as with Voltaire, of course. They lie.
Do Freemasons actually seek a dumbed-down people, an ignorant group of people? Is this advantageous to their goals?
Now, Brother Savers, investigative journalist Paul Fisher notes that on January 10, 1945, legislation sponsored by the National Education Association, that's the NEA, an organization that historically has been closely tied to Scottish Rite Freemasonry, was introduced in the House and Senate. It provided substantial funds for public education, but made no provision for assisting non-public schools. Fisher further documents that the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite funded the propaganda for passage of this bill. That's from Scarlet and the Beast, pages 244, 245. Now, Brother Savers, Freemasonry had its agents everywhere. At this time, the National Education Association's executive secretary of almost 20 years, from 1935 on, was 33rd degree Mason Willard E. Givens. His mission was to consolidate the control of education by the NEA. Now, in Freemasonry, the Antichrist Upon Us, published in 1957 by an organization called Fragments of Truth at Elon College, North Carolina, one reads, and put this on the board, when the program of education for a new America was firmly established in the public schools and the NEA control of education an undisputed fact, 33rd degree Mason Willard E. Givens resigned as executive secretary of the NEA to take over the educational program of the prestigious Supreme Council 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Freemasonry mounted another attack. The mind control tactics required to teach atheism and globalism, which is necessary to successfully inaugurate the future godless one-world government, could not be taught in rural schools where curriculum was controlled by parents. Consolidation was the Scottish Rite's next order attack against parental influence. Freemasonry sent forth former Harvard University president James B. Conant, a 33rd degree Mason and member of the NEA's Educational Policies Commission and member of the Council on Foreign Relations, for that matter, on a special tour. Fragments of Truth tells this story. When the massive school building program was being launched early in the 1950s, Dr. James B. Conant was commissioned to tour the country in behalf of school consolidation. A summary of Dr. Conant's recommendations was published in booklet form and sent out by the Supreme Council of Scottish Rite to top bodies, leaders in 35 southern and western states. For Scarlet and the Beast, page 246. With Masonic propaganda preceding Dr. Conant's tour, he was assured large audiences wherever he spoke. In every meeting, the audience was peppered with Masons from that particular jurisdiction, Masons awaiting orders from their Grand Master. Following Conant's tour, each of the 35 Grand Lodge jurisdictions ordered its Masonic constituency in all walks of life to talk positively of consolidation in their work, churches, and bars. As a result, parents everywhere marched to the polls and voted to surrender their control. Consolidation of 259,000 school districts into 1,600 became a reality. After consolidation, parents were no longer intimate with teachers. As planned, both became alienated by the larger body, the NEA. Gradually, but surely, the Masonic-controlled NEA became adversarial toward parents. Although the PTA was formed to bridge the gap, it pales in strength to Freemasonry's Revolutionary Teachers Union. Now, Brother Saviors, in the March 1959 issue of the Scottish Rite's New Age magazine, Freemasonry praised the efforts of Masons who were responsible for the educational coup d'etat. Every Mason, put this on the board, every Mason becomes a teacher of Masonic philosophy to the community, and the craft is a missionary of the new order, a liberal order in which Masons become high priests. We proclaim that this Masonic philosophy, which has brought forth a new order, has become a reality by the establishment of the public school system financed by the state for the combined purpose of technological and sociological education of the mass of humanity, beginning at an early age in childhood. Scarlet of the Beast, page 246. Well, sir, every cult wants the children to indoctrinate, and this is known. This certainly applies to the most successful of all cults, the Serpent people, the Brotherhood of the Serpent, operating through Freemasonry.
Well, hold it right there, Mr. X. Hold it. We've run out of time. That's all she wrote. Thank you for being our guest today. This is Fight, Flee, or Laugh. My name is John Savers. I'm your host, and I appreciate your tuning in my program. Until next time,